This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy.
Robert Capuccio, welcome to your show and mine, the Self-Help Antidote and Roll with the Punches. Wasn't that formal, Robert?
That was great. See, your intro is much better than mine, which is why I like when you introduce me.
How are you?
It seems so professional. It's like we're grown-ups or something.
It's like I've done over 600 times.
Yeah, it's almost. You get that feeling. Wow.
Amazing.
Funny that.
Amazing.
So what's going on, Tiffany? How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing really good, actually. I'm doing really good. You know, I was really tired last week as I whinged about on our last banter. This week I'm feeling really good. I really rested up and I'm feeling revitalized again. And I've done a bunch of really wonderful podcast conversations, and I've just, been reminiscing at times how much I just still love and feel blessed by that, and how much I get out of the process of doing it. I love it. I love feeling like that.
I think that's one of the indicators of whether or not you're on the right track. You're doing what you love and you're never getting sick of it. You do it for its own sake almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like I got to do this because if I do this, then that will happen. But it's like, no, I do this because it's not like I have to do this. I get to do this. I think that's a powerful distinction. Yeah. I don't think a lot of people that are lazy or think they're lazy or appear to be lazy are actually lazy. I just think they're misaligned. They haven't stumbled upon that it factor. They just either don't know what it is or they're having a hard time engaging in it for a series of reasons that probably go well beyond the scope of our conversation.
I think of one of the things I talk about a lot is getting blinkered and what I mean by that is kind of getting our sights set on something and then missing the point along the way, missing the steps, missing the journey. And I think about that, when I started this, there wasn't a plan or a journey. There was just doing it and loving it and going, I'll get better at this. I'm not sure what that looks like or what the process is. And the beauty of it is, it's kind of remained that way. And I notice sometimes in the middle of it, I did yesterday, I had a really touching story on, somebody sharing a touching story, and I was just filled with emotion and awe and wonder listening. And I kind of, in that particular moment, I was like, I don't feel like a podcaster right now. I'm going to be speechless when this person stops speaking, but this is such a privilege for me, and this conversation is changing my life, and I love that. And I love that hasn't been overridden by what question will I ask yet for this podcast. I haven't over systemized the process, which I think sometimes we can do, not deliberately, but just because we go, oh, now I'm doing this and this is what it's, all of the things that have to come together to make it happen.
To be fair, you've probably had a lot of fascinating conversations. What was it about this particular story? Was it the way it was told? Was it the emotional resonance? What was it?
It was a little bit of both. It was both a really sad story and a really happy and positive story at the end, in a way, like that, so much to gain from it. But this John was his name. John was sharing the loss of his wife, and she died by a brain aneurysm, very sudden. So he relived that with me step by step. So to sit and listen to someone speak, and he does a lot of advocacy. So she's an organ donor. And so he spoke about that. So he's done a lot of advocacy. So speaking about it and sharing the story is something he's really passionate about. But it felt like, I don't know how many times he speaks a lot. He hasn't done a lot. I think that was his first podcast that's going to air. So he's talked about it a lot, not in that same format, but it felt, and I feel a difference when someone is telling me for the very first time they're sharing their story in what will be a public forum. And he had that feel about him. And sometimes when people have gotten used to sharing the story, not a huge difference, but I feel a different sense. And it just feels like he and I were sitting and I was hearing that, and I had to keep thinking, Tiff, this is a podcast. It was just, but I felt this visceral inside my whole body in this beautiful way, the visceral raw emotion sitting within me. And I said to him at the end, he goes, I'm sorry about that, but I'm also not, because of the perspective it gives. And I said, you shouldn't even be sorry, because I think in the right way, we need to appreciate and feel and allow all emotions, whether they're grief or anxiety or fear or wonder, or I think it's important. And I loved being able to feel that and recognize it and take away the perspectives in the moment and empathize, and then end on that beautiful positive note of the change and the beauty that. And then we sat for about half an hour after we stopped recording, and we were, it was bringing up memories, and we were laughing about the little things that he missed about her, and God, it was beautiful.
I cannot help. I try to not, but I cannot help imagining that happening to me when you're talking about that. And I think a lot of people can't help doing that. And, as long as you don't get stuck there in a conversation, but when you hear something, that connection, that empathy is to imaginably project yourself into that person's situation. It would be brutal. And it goes to the fallacy. There's so many fallacies on human behavior because people just don't know. And they're being informed by other people that don't know. So it's like my opinion being, and everybody has a right to their opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean that your opinion is an informed opinion. When it comes to human behavior and why we do the things we do, there's so much evidence that contradicts so much of the advice we get. And, one of the things that people are told is to avoid, quote unquote, negative emotions. There's no such thing as a negative emotion. There's there's negative rumination. There's allowing emotions to dominate you or create maladaptive patterns of behavior. That could lead to serious mental health issues taken to the extreme. But all emotions serve us, and you'll never be the evolution of who you are built upon a lot of those painful emotions. If we had no reason to suffer, we'd have no reason to live. If nothing's worth suffering for, what's really worth living for?
Yes.
And when you have a person that you love so much, like a partner, those excruciatingly painful emotions take you back to what needs were met in that relationship in the first place, because it's that absence of that relationship and it's that vulnerability, that wound, that void left by their absence. I think that shapes us sometimes in far more profound ways than quote unquote positive emotions. But there seems to be this belief that you should embrace some emotions, other emotions you should avoid, or there's an amount of time you're allowed to feel them. And then after a while, okay, you should get over it the same time somebody else gets over it.
Yeah.
We're so different. We have such diversity amongst one person to an next. Hoffer says this all the time. It's like, my brain is vastly different than your brain. You're not going to respond to the world and see the world the same way I do. And I'm not going to think like you. And people they're completely flawed by this. And we have these overriding assumptions, like make better decisions. That's another thing that comes up. And what disturbs me is with coaches. Because again, everybody has a right to their opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean because you have conviction behind your opinion that you're necessarily correct. You could be completely ignorant, not ignorant in terms of being stupid. I mean, ignorant in terms of being uninformed, and being uninformed to the point where you can't recognize how uninformed you are. It's kind of like fish discover water last. It's kind of like that scenario but you still have these operating assumptions. But when you're a coach, you don't have that luxury. Like if you're witnessing a crime on a street corner, you have that option whether or not you decide you're going to intervene, you're going to go and get help, or you're going to avoid the situation. Unless, of course, you're in law enforcement, you're a police officer, you no longer have that option because you've accepted the responsibility. This is my role I will take in society. This is my job. I take responsibility for this problem that I did not create. Same thing with a coach. You don't have an option to operate on vague assumptions that are rooted in opinion, which is always rooted in some level of cognitive bias, because that's not only not coaching, that can do more harm to your client than good. When you look at coaching, there's basically three forms of coaching. There's following, directing, and guiding. So here's an example of this. Let's say I'm a coach and I work within a smoking cessation program. I'm your health coach. You come to me and I start directing the conversation at some point around cigarettes. Well, you're not going to go, well, why are you harping on this? Because you basically signed up for coaching for smoking cessation. So there's kind of like, if not an explicit, there's an implicit agreement between the two of us that this is what's going to frame our conversation and the direction. So I'm kind of leading in this dance. Another way is following, where I have absolutely no agenda and I just follow what emerges, what shows up, where you need the conversation to go. And in the middle of that is kind of like guiding. And that's the coaching style that I tend to gravitate towards. Not all the time. A lot of times I have to, by nature of the group coaching, be more directive. Other times I'm more in the following style. But guiding is where I gravitate towards, something in the middle. But if you have an agenda with a client, in other words, they didn't agree upon, okay, I need this to go in this direction in this session. And you're telling them like, well, what's the difference between two people that grow up in the same environment? Let's say somebody grew up in a really bad environment and they were bullied, they were traumatized. Maybe they were going through severe domestic abuse at home. Maybe one parent, had substance abuse. Maybe it was neglect, and they had a sibling. And you as a coach is like, well, what do you think the difference is between you and your sibling? They just made a different decision. You're showing up with an agenda, which is the way you think and the way you respond to the world is not the way you should. You should be looking at the world the way I look at the world. Good luck having that person open up to you and be vulnerable and allow you to guide them to their own realizations in their own time about what's the best course of action for them to move forward. You have blown it as a coach, not to mention you're wrong. Like if you talk, I know you just interviewed Cam McDonald again. Cam McDonald will tell you exactly why how you were developing in the womb might be very different from how your sibling growing up in the same house is developing in the womb.
Yeah.
And how that development created predominance within your hormonal profile that makes you interact and perceive the world completely different than a sibling. So there's epigenetic factors. There's how you've interpreted experiences. There's different in age. So you're experiencing the same things at a different age. So it's completely different because you're at a different developmental stage and you don't see the world the same way. So there's all these differences. There's what's going on with you psychologically, hormonally, biologically, et cetera, at the time in which you basically encounter a situation and how that frames future. So there are so many variables we can't even talk about them in the time span of one podcast, but people have so much assumptions about how people should behave. And usually that's not the way they interact with the world. They're operating on a fundamental attribution bias, which is when something happens to them, I behave the way I behaved, especially if it's a behavior that's not flattering because of all these external circumstances that were beyond my control. But when I observe the same exact behavior in somebody else, no, it wasn't your environment. I saw this post the other day. Your circumstances are irrelevant. It's what you're made of. partially true and partially you have no fucking idea what you're talking about, lady. So it's one of those. But when you see somebody doing the same thing you did, no, it's not their environment. With me, it was my circumstances. With them, it was an intrinsic attribute that they don't have. They were weak. They were lazy. They were evil. They were stupid. But it's never you. From a coaching perspective, that's catastrophic. It's unethical, actually.
It's so true. It's so true. And I know that we've talked about this before, the idea around how differently, even myself at different times more recently felt the effects of motivation, right? And as a trainer and an athlete, it was such a profound and important thing to feel when all of the environmental stuff changed and stress changed and life changed, and I went, this is hard. I don't want to do this the way I normally want to do it. This is so important to know, because how often is it like we frame everything so positively. Yeah, I do the hard work. I always get up and get it done. Half of the athletes or trainers saying that are addicted to exercise or addicted to the accolades that we get. Like, there is a level of that happening as well, right? That's driving the behavior. The behavior isn't just the decision to do it. I just decide to get up, because wait until there's a pandemic and you're locked in your house all the time, and then you've all of that self-motivation to always train alone and train hard. Wait till you've got to use that in 100% of your training sessions like I did. And then after months and months and months, you step into the gym and you're like, can't really be bothered today. Oh, that's weird. I can always be bothered, but I can't, because I've used up all of my, in inverted commas, willpower. That I used to only have to have 20% of that in reserves, because the rest of the time I was with a coach or I was with a team or I was in a different place or environment.
Yeah. I mean, willpower is an interesting thing, because people talk about discipline. And when you move away from moralizations around discipline, like what is it? Like if we would talk to Paul Taylor about that and say, well, Taylor, what is discipline? He might not say, well, it's a character trait that strong people possess. He might say, well, it's the glucose-mediated function of your prefrontal cortex.
Boom.
He might describe it like that. So therefore, there's a currency to that. And all currencies are limited. Now, some people have a lot of currency saved up because they've been working on it for a long time. They've been making the right investments. So it yields a significant return. Some people have a little, but there is a finite amount. So you know why I think you would make a great coach. You have so many attributes that make you a great podcaster that would also make you a great coach. And I think you have what F. Scott Fitzgerald defined as first-rate intelligence. He said first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing viewpoints in your mind at the very same time and still retain the ability to function, which you do. You can say, well, I feel this way, but I also feel this way. You could hold a point of view, and you could also sit with someone in their point of view and go, yep, I get that. And that is so, you would think that's that's second nature, right? You think like we would learn that in childhood. That's a whole theory of mind, isn't it? But we don't. We're completely blown away that other people don't see things and react the exact way that we think we do. Not the way we do, the way we think we do. Because a lot of times, I think the people that when people protest a lot, I just hear like from Macbeth, the lady doth protest too much. Something's going on there. There's a game under this. I always go back to this book. I was asked a question in the leadership coaching, and we ran out of time, and I couldn't really get into it. I was a little bit relieved because it was one of these on the spot questions, and the lady who asked this question, she's brilliant. Like she'll say things so innocently because she's extremely humble and considerate, but she's so smart. And I'm like, oh wow, she just really put that out there, didn't she? And I just keep coming back to Eric Berne in his book, Games People Play on Transactional Analysis. That is it's one of those books where you read it, and if you really get into it, you cannot look at people's interactions the same way ever again.
I'm going to have to read that book. You've talked about it so much.
You've got to read that book. It's written for the layman. That would be me. But it's not an easy read in the flow of it, but it's so insightful.
I'm looking on Audible as we speak. I'm hoping it's an Audible book.
Yeah, I'm sure you can get it on Audible. I have the written version of it. It's so funny because it's another assumption. So I was reading something on dyslexia because I have a friend of mine. Sorry.
Owen Mullen? Is that who wrote it? No. Owen Mullen? No?
No.
Oh, Eric Berne. Got it.
Berne. Yeah.
Oh, dear. It's only in what looks like
really
Spanish.
No, it's definitely in English. I have the English version myself.
I don't want to download that in case it's, imagine if the words are in Spanish or whatever that language is.
Well, I would imagine that would be the case.
Yes. So I will not purchase that just yet. As you were. Continue on.
It would be very deceitful if they said, well, yeah, the Spanish version. You download it. German. Never expecting this.
Touché.
So, well, I don't even know where I was going. Oh, so I have a friend of mine who teaches special ed. Beautiful dude. And he said that he was having a conversation with another teacher about a dyslexic student. And the teacher was kind of like saying, doesn't matter if you have dyslexia. Everybody needs to learn by the same standards. And he was like, that's absurd. Everybody learns differently. Like if you read Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences, like it's kind of like judging a musician by the same standard as a literary professor, or saying that athletic intelligence, like Michael Jordan, is useless because he doesn't have the reading proficiency of somebody else, or because he can't play a trombone. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, isn't our job as teachers to help people find their strengths and how they learn best? And he said, this person with dyslexia, if you asked her a question and you wrote it out in a paragraph, she would have no idea what the question is, and she wouldn't know how to answer it. But if you gave her graphs and visuals and same exact question laid out differently, this person, as a lot of people who are dyslexic, is brilliant. And she's not deficient. She just learns differently. Isn't it our job to help people find their strengths and how they learn best, and then flourish from there? Like someone, let's say Richard Branson, for example, who's famously dyslexic. He seems to have worked around it. He found his way. I think he's doing okay. I was concerned about his career for a while, but I think he's on the right track at this point. And you know, the teacher's like, or they could buckle down. And I think the unsaid thing is buckle down like I did and learn how to read. That's like saying somebody without feet should buckle down and learn how to just run fast once they join the track team. No, they might need a prosthetic. Doesn't mean they can't run, but they may not run the same way you run. And sometimes we play a game. We pretend we have a virtue, which is fairness and standardization. But the game we're really playing is, I don't feel like I had help. I'm insecure. I'm angry. You should suffer. You know, I think people should suffer as much as they need to, but no more. You know, life brings suffering automatically. I don't think that because people are different, like they should be penalized for it. I think it's beautiful that we all learn differently.
I read a LinkedIn post. I was trying to remember who posted it, or anyway, it said reading for 1 hour a day is only 4% of your day. If you do that for every day for 10 years, you will be at the top of your field, blah, 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 blah. It was something like that. And I just I read that and I was like, no context, reading, no context about what you're reading, why are you going to be in the top of your field, reading 1 hour per day. There's no context about anything. There's, like you said, there's so many more variables. Someone will read that and go, oh, if I just read for an hour a day, I'm going to be at the top of my field. Mm-hmm. Nothing about what they do with the information, their environment, how they work, how they think. Do they think critically? What are they reading? Are they reading only stuff that's in line with their already cognitive biases?
These are all very good points. I think a lot of that was implied by I don't know who wrote that, but giving them the benefit of the doubt, I think they were saying, okay, career focused, relevant information. But you bring up a really good point there. A lot of people don't know how to read. I mean, they could read. If you wrote them a letter, they'd understand what you're trying to say.
Hopefully, because if they can't read that post, and then they can't interpret that they need to read more.
It's a whole vicious cycle. It's like, I don't even know what they're like on Instagram. They're just looking at the pictures, aren't they, at that point? But we're kind of taught you read from one direction to another based on where you're from, like word after word. It's pretty linear, and it's not reading. You know, I know I've had a lot of issues with reading, but I read proficient enough just to read advice just like that. And I took it, and, you know, it made me happier. Like reading an hour a day uninterrupted. It's not only something relevant, but it makes me happy. It focuses my mind in a way that quiets me down. I love it. But I had to learn that reading is also dialoguing. So I read the same way as if I have questions for the author and I'm sitting down having a cup of coffee. Well, you're saying that. Well, why? Why do you say that? Well, is there ever an instance where the opposite is true? And within the text, I look for that answer. I'll highlight that answer. And then I'll write in the margin a question. That's why I prefer reading on paper. I feel like not only is it more tactile and enjoyable for me, like I have a different intrinsic feeling and kinesthetic connection to the page, which might sound weird, but I also feel I retain more. Yet at the same time, reading on a tablet's great because I can highlight something and open up a page and start to type and start to write my own notes and like, okay, this is what I feel about what the author just said. And it's like, I don't read linear. When I read for enjoyment, I read linearly. When I read for knowledge, I'll go through and I'll read every chapter heading. Or if you're reading a textbook, you know, like it has a diagram and explains under that diagram pretty much what the next few pages are trying to explain. And it's a synopsis. I'll read all of that in the book first, just so I have a working understanding of how the information's laid out, what the author is trying to communicate, what the author feels is the most poignant pieces of information throughout the text. And then I'll look through the actual pages to go, okay, here's my questions based on that diagram, based on what's italicized, based on what's put in a little gray box there. Mm-hmm. Where's the answer? Because, you could sit and read a book and somebody go like...
Do you know what's funny? I'm going to interrupt there.
Sorry.
No, it's just because you just prompted my thought about the italicized book. So at time, like I don't like reading informational books. I like to audio book it. But when there's those boxes that repeat stuff, I get the shits because when I do read and then I start rereading, I'm like, why you keep putting this shit here? I've already read it. But for you, you're looking for that first. You're going through and you're looking for those bits. Isn't that funny?
Because the author's saying, hey, this is what I feel is pretty important. Pay attention to this. This is a summarization, but it's a critical point from my perspective. So I kind of know a little bit about how that author thinks because when I'm reading for information, I want a dialogue. But some people, it's not reading an hour a day. It might be, and I always say do both. even if you're stronger in one, weaker in the other, kind of like 80-20 or 70-30, you might not retain a lot from reading because your brain doesn't work that way. Listen. Like when you're in your car, when you're walking to work, you're on the train, listen to an audiobook. So that might be 70% of what you do. And then 30% of the time you read a book. But you got to figure out what your strengths are. If you listen better than you read, because people always say listening's not reading. Well, yeah, but you're assuming that someone else's brain works the way your brain works. Like there's this app that I'm fascinated with. I'm not going to buy it. But it kind of, you take a photo of your page and it verbalizes what's on the page. And people are like, that's cheating. That's not lazy. That's finding an alternative pathway if you're someone who struggles to comprehend through one learning modality. That's adaptability. That adaptability is not a negative attribute. I would say, again, do both, but it's these overriding. Don't make assumptions about other people. Rather, ask people questions, reflect their thoughts back to them, lead them towards understanding themselves better. If you lead me to understand myself better, and I make a declaration at the point of that revelation, it's going to mean so much more to me than if you're telling me what to do.
When I read, I'm thinking about how I process. When I read fiction before bed, I read a book. I won't listen to a fiction book. I'll read it. And I'm just trying to pick apart my process and why one works and why one just doesn't. And so I feel like when I'm doing that, I'm asking my brain to shut off and we're getting immersed into this story and we're there, right? So it works and I can read the book. When I'm reading informational books, I'm impatient. I feel like my brain fires up. It wants the information quicker than my eyes are reading it. And it also wants to digest and query. And so I can't read with my eyes and have those conversations, but I can listen and have them. I think that's what I do on the podcast because I can be in a conversation listening and almost have a second little track running, digesting, thinking, and holding on to questions at the same time while I'm still actively listening, which sounds weird, but I'm
the same way.
Yeah, I observe it and I go, well, it doesn't work. If I can't hurry, even informational videos or workshops, if I can't hurry the speed up to a 1.5, I get really impatient and I notice my mind go off on tangents. It goes elsewhere. It's got to be quick, so I've got to stay engaged and be like, yep. I'm getting this information, and it's coming at a pace that suits me.
Same. When I'm listening to an audiobook, I always speed it up to 1.5 because my comprehension increases.
Yeah.
Especially if it's really slow and monotone speaker. It's like, oh God, I just keep a pencil in my car so I could stab myself in the face at a stoplight. But
yes.
When I'm listening to concepts, I retain a lot more when it's an audiobook. But if I'm exploring information that's detailed, that's scientific, I need to read it. So I'm a big fan of the Huberman podcast. I think we both are.
Yeah.
But sometimes because he's quite detailed in the science at certain parts of that podcast, if I'm driving, I'm like, okay, I don't understand a word he just said, but I could completely relate to it if I was reading it. Which I think he has this membership where you sign up and you can get his transcripts. I don't know how to access that, but he was talking about it at one point. I think that's a really good idea. Not to promote Huberman on our show, but
maybe
why not?
if he wrote it somewhere and you could read it, then you could interpret how to do it.
Yeah, because no, because probably because I was listening to it. It's quite detailed. You go here, click on this. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like. See, it's that vicious circle.
Yeah. See, I
don't know how to access the transcripts because he didn't write it down.
I love his podcast, but I have to be seeking intently the information on the podcast he's talking about. I can't if it's just for listening's sake, I have to choose another podcast because it steps into that realm for me. But when he has a topic that in that moment I want to listen to, or I go search his podcast because I want to go deep on a particular thing and brush up on it. He's brilliant.
That's the same reason why when I'm taking a walk, I don't listen to the Mind Body Brain Project. I don't listen to, I said that correct, right? Yeah, with Paul Taylor, because he'll go deep into information. But here's the thing. I'll listen to you, and Craig is great for a drive because he'll have many different beats as he interjects, and sometimes he'll co-present. So he's more of a co-presenting type of interviewer, and then he'll present his questions. He'll crack a joke. He's hilarious. But even when people get into deep subject, it seems so conceptual and conversational. At the same time, it's detailed.
Yeah. So
if I know I'm going to be in the call for like an hour, 2 hours, I'll turn on Gregor's podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you don't enjoy something, if you don't enjoy the listening process, then it's just laborious.
And you think about this from a coaching perspective, right? Me, I think I'm a coach, and I'm going to tell you that I think reading is better. And if you're really serious about learning, you can listen to audios if you want to, but you got to be willing to do the work, and you have to read because listening's not reading. Well, first of all, I'm not coaching. I'm advising at this point. I'm consulting, and I'm doing it operating on a bunch of scenarios that's probably incorrect. And now what are you going to do? You have two choices. You can either comply, yes, coach, or you can deny, which is, no, that's not the way my brain works. I feel completely invalidated because I listen to stuff hours a day. I'm really serious about learning and development. And I know I'm serious about it. I know I'm doing this work. I know I'm always trying to improve. And because it's different, you just told me I'm full of shit, coach. So now there's a break in our rapport. And without rapport, there's a reason why in motivational interviewing, there are 4 phases. There's engagement, right? There's focus, evoking, and planning. And there's a reason why we start with engagement, which is a rapport facilitated process. You just broke that. Good luck with the rest of the session.
Yeah. That's one thing I talk about a lot in my networking presentations with businesses is what you love is more important than what you know, because what you love is what begins the basis of rapport with people, because when you share what you love, you innately come together. You're sharing a part of yourself. You're connecting. When you share what you know, you're trying to portray something. It's a little bit more persona-y. I do business with people when I know what they love about what they do.
Oh, that's so insightful. And I think you found the title of this podcast. What you love is more important than what you know.
Boom.
For me, that is the most important thing that was said on this podcast episode.
I'm writing it down so I don't forget.
I might even incorporate it, because I have operating principles when I teach salespeople. I have operating principles when I'm training coaches. One I got from like Coach Meg. My belief is greater than your doubt. I think that is a beautiful space to hold. Coach Meg is Margaret Moore, actually. Another one is intention is more important than technique. So a lot of people, well, what's the technique? Well, what are the top 5 questions I should ask? You've already lost focus. Another thing is for you and your client, what you love is more important than what you know. That could be another operating assumption or principle. I love that. I think we could even wrap this episode right at that point. Mic drop.
Mic drop. Thanks, Bobby. I love this convo.
Yeah, you take the rest of the day off.
No, I think we should do another.
Okay.
Thanks, Bobby. Hey, thanks, everyone. Keep being amazing.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.